and welcome. For all of you who are tuned in, you're watching TMH's Daily English News as we present you our headlines for today. The U.S. condemns Eritrea's return to war on Tigray. The Ethiopian government again resorts to parading Tigrayan civilians as quote-unquote prisoners of war, and Sudan orders aid groups to evacuate the border area within Ethiopia. The U.S. condemns Eritrea's return to war on Tigray. As we move on to our main updates, U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa has urged all the parties to halt military operations and engage in peace talks. The United States on Friday dispatched an envoy to Ethiopia to seek an end to the renewed fighting and condemn neighboring Eritrea for re-entering the conflict in the northern region of Tigray. According to White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, the U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Mike Hammer, was in Addis over the weekend and conveyed all of the parties should halt military operations and engage in peace talks. We condemn Eritrea's re-entry into the conflict and the continuing TPLF offensive outside of Tigray and the Ethiopian government's airstrikes, as she told the reporters. She also said there is no military solution to this ongoing conflict. Eritrea, which is one of the world's most closed nations with one of its most authoritarian governments, has been accused of heinous violence crimes within this conflict. Amnesty International said that Eritrean forces at the start of the conflict back in November 2020 massacred hundreds of civilians in the ancient city of Aksum. After months of denial, the Eritrean troops had crossed the border. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed in March 2021 admitted to their presence. Abiy, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for his reconciliation with Eritrea, but since then has fallen out of favor with the United States, a longtime Ethiopian ally, which voiced revolution over the violence in Tigray, where U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has spoken of quote-unquote ethnic cleansing. Access to northern Ethiopia is severely restricted currently, and Tigray has been under complete communication blackout for over a year now. Meanwhile, international crisis groups, senior Ethiopian analyst William Davidson indicated that the U.S. and the UN envoys in Addis have so far not achieved any tangible progress towards any recommitment to the truce and the peace talks that were ignited back in March of this year. The Ethiopian government again resorts to parading Tigrayan civilians as POWs. This is not the first time the Ethiopian regime, through the media, as it controls the country, is parading Tigrayan civilians who are detained in concentration camps all over Ethiopia as people of war. As you can see on your screen, all of these pictures were gathered quote-unquote as prisoners of war, which again, even a year ago, BBC World exposed stage parade of Tigrayan prisoners of war as well. Tigray head doctors describe worsening medical care catastrophe in an emergency briefing that took place over the weekend. In an international Zoom briefing, doctors Amanuel Haile and Kebrom Gabrasilase gave a detailed briefing on the deteriorating medical crisis in Tigray caused by the Ethiopian siege, which impedes all aspects of healthcare. According to the briefing, less than 50% of healthcare facilities have any staffing at all. Many are closed, but even those that are open have no electricity or any supplies left. There are no antibiotics to treat infections, no surgical supplies, and even simple things such as beds and sheets and soap are scarce as well. No electricity is present to run medical equipment except for the occasional runs at the Territory Eider Hospital, which is a rare basis. During the so-called truce following the exit of the occupying forces of Ethiopia from most parts of Tigray, there has been strangulation, blockade of food, medicine, and fuel included. The head doctors disclosed only 5% of necessary medical supplies were coming into through the blockade, and the Ethiopian military continues to limit what will be cleared for transport into the Tigray region from Ethiopia so that the people of Tigray would quote-unquote be punished. Immunizations of children, oxytocin to help childbirth, HIV testing, antibiotics, cancer drugs, tuberculosis drugs, anti-malarials, oxygen, and surgical equipment are amongst a few of the many banned items to enter the region. Medical crisis extends beyond just humans, as there have been outbreaks of rabies In some cities, from infected dogs and many animals have become infected with anthrax, both spreading to human as sick animals are desperately consumed. While 50,000 healthcare workers have attempted to remain on station to help the population, they have been going unpaid essentially since November 2020, since the break-off of this conflict. The report noted that there's no fuel or parts to allow transportation to the patients that are in healthcare facilities either. Meanwhile, a surgeon at Mekele's Haider Hospital described that the medical situation at the hospital is a nightmare. The surgeon, Fasika Amdesilase, made the remarks in an interview with CBC. Let's take a listen.
In Tigray, 6 million people are said to be cut off from basic services, with millions displaced. Dr. Fasika Amdesilase is a surgeon at the Haider University in Mekele, Tigray. Doctor, good morning.
Good morning.
Can you describe the situation in Mekele right now?
So in Mekele, we have been totally disconnected from Ethiopia for the last now almost 16 months, 15 months and something. So Mekele, still there is activity. We go out and but there is a serious problem of fuel, cash. That's a cross-cutting. And so in Mekele, the living condition has become very terrible. We don't have items coming like food oil, food itself, wheat flour, grain. There is shortage. And then on the streets, you see a lot of people starting begging for money, begging for food. Decent people who used to have a house with their kids alone. You see a lot of people walking because the car service, taxi service has been decreasing so much because of the fuel, because we are not getting fuel only by contraband, I guess. And it's probably 10 times more than the usual price. So, and then you see in Mekele, you see carts pulled by horses. They almost had disappeared, but for the last now months, people are using them as a means of transportation more and more.
Our final update for today: Sudan orders aid groups to evacuate the bordering area with Ethiopia. The Sudanese authorities urged humanitarian aid agencies to evacuate the Hamdiat Border Reception Center for Ethiopian refugees, citing fears for their safety following the intensification of clashes near the Sudanese border. Thousands of refugees fled from northern Ethiopia region of Tigray when hostilities broke out between the Tigray government and the federal government in Ethiopia in November of 2020. However, in recent weeks, fighting resumed between Ethiopian forces, backed by the Eritrean forces, against the Tigray forces. Informed sources confirmed to Sudan Tribune that fierce military confrontation between the sides continued on Sunday near the Sudanese-Ethiopian-Eritrean border triangle in the areas of Dima and Kudama. As a result of these escalations, the Sudanese security authorities ordered foreign organizations operating in Hamdiat Reception Center to leave the area after the intensification of military confrontations around Dima, which borders Hamdiat, as the Sudanese military sources further added. The sources also said that the authorities plan to evacuate the civilians receding the area as Sudanese military reinforcements were deployed in both Hamdiat and Kudama. Hamdiat is located in the Great Fashka near the common border between Gadaraf and Kassala states in Sudan, which is adjacent to Ethiopia and Eritrea. Medicines Sans Frontieres, Plan Sudan, UNHCR, COR, Muslim Aid, as well as Child Welfare Council are among the aid groups that are currently working in the bordered area. Citing to drivers coming from the near bordering area, humanitarian workers in Shura town of western Tigray told Al Jazeera that there was a cross-border shelling that took place on Wednesday this past week. Getachew Reda, member of Tigray Armed Forces Central Command, accused the government and its neighboring Eritrea, which backed the federal forces during the war's early phase, of being responsible for the opening on the new front. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.